Um, I'm going to start with the Beatles song to start the event. Thank you. So welcome everyone to the CEGAANA Leadership Series. It's a beautiful Sunday here in California. We are also fresh from resetting the clocks today for daylight saving. If you're following the news, this might be last but one, fingers crossed. Nevertheless, I must say this is a pretty confusing day. Did we lose 1 hour or did we gain 1 hour? Can you get it right? Maybe Google it later. So it also goes very well with the topic of the day, leadership dilemmas. Thanks to people joining from different time zones, especially people joining from India and elsewhere. It's great to have you all here. I must say this, we have a great program put together, and can't wait to get started. Before getting into the introductions, some bookkeeping. We are recording this session and we'll make this available in the CEGAANA YouTube channel, hopefully by the end of the day. In order to have, not have any interference, please mute yourself unless you're called in to speak or ask questions. We have the last 10 minutes marked for the Q&A session. Please send your questions via chat meanwhile as well. You'll be called out to ask directly in the order received. If you're not willing to ask directly, I'll ask your question on your behalf. With that, it's time to introduce our chief guest and host for the program. What one might not realize today is that we just not have one, two, but three CEG distinguished alumni amongst us today. That makes my job very easy, actually, to introduce. Oh, actually not. It's actually very difficult. Let me make an attempt. I'm so humbled to welcome Radha Ramaswamy Basu, CEO of iMerit Technologies and co-founder of Anudeep Foundation. Radha Basu graduated from CEG in 1971 in ECE and a master's with a master's from University of Southern California and Stanford Business School. Through iMerit and Anudeep, Radha is committed to using her wealth of experience in technology management to holistically address the nexus of AI technology and inclusive workforce with gender and youth employment. To date, iMerit has employed over 6,000 people with 53% women and youth in digital and data services in growing industries ranging from virtual and augmented reality, autonomous mobility, sharing economy, to e-commerce and financial services. Before founding iMerit and Anudeep, Radha served as the chairman and CEO of SupportSoft, which she took public in 2000. Prior to that, she spent 20 years at Hewlett-Packard, where she founded the company's operations in India and set up the first software center of any multinational in Bangalore. Among several awards and accolades over the years, like top 25 women of the web, I want to mention the latest one, the CEO of the Year at Entrepreneur Awards 2022. Congratulations. We are thrilled to have you join us today, ma'am. Next, I'm very happy to welcome the host, Dr. Janaki Akila, CEG 1981 ECE, Masters from Boston University, and a PhD in ECE from Carnegie Mellon. Dr. Janaki is an accomplished leader, a technology leader, enabling global high-tech companies, financial and healthcare institutions to lead major market transitions and align technology with corporate strategy. She currently leads digital transformation programs at Google. Her previous roles include principal partner at McKinsey and Company, scientist at HP and CMU. I'm sorry for the sound. Welcome, Janaki, and thank you for being the host today and moderating the discussion. Next, I welcome the dear and near and dear host, Dr. Shanta Mogan, a person who needs no introduction. Dr. Shanta graduated from CEG in 1971 ECE went on to get a PhD from Carnegie Mellon in operations management. She has donned many hats throughout the years as software leader, CEO, co-founder, columnist, mentor, three-time author of books, etc. Dr. Shanta is also a CEG board member and highly admired for her work leading the CEG Betterment and student mentorship programs, amongst many others. Her recent book, Leadership Lessons with the Beatles, Actionable Tips and Tools for Becoming Better at Leading, forms the basis of this leadership series. Welcome, Shanta, and as always, thank you for being the pillar of support. There's no doubt we have like three pioneers amongst us today in fields spanning technology management and building companies. Without further delay, let us hear from them. Thank you.
Thank you, KG. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. And good evening to the folks in a different time zone. It's interesting times, isn't it? Seems like everything we know about leadership is being actively revised, rewritten from the Twitter leadership to, the UK prime ministership to everything in between. So these are very, very interesting times indeed. So what I thought we might do is to spend the next hour sort of delving into leadership, continuing from what we did in the previous series. And we'll delve a little bit into the theory and practice of leadership, if you will, right? As probably many of you know, in theory, practice and leadership is the same, but in practice, they are quite different. So let's dive a little bit into what is it, and specifically, how do leaders resolve some of the dilemmas that come that way. We talk about leadership and we say leadership is all about making the right trade-offs and choices, and how do we do that? There is a link, as KG mentioned, to the previous session, and Shanta, you had outlined leadership attributes there, which in itself was interesting, right? Leadership is not something where we said that we know it when we see it, but you broke it down into some very nice attributes and then linked it to the Beatles songs. So I thought maybe we'd begin today, Shanta, maybe with a little bit of reading from you, chapter 13, which was the song, Hello, Goodbye.
Absolutely, Janaki, and thank you. So let me read about the chapter, which is kind of the topic of today, the dilemmas. I called it Balancing the Tensions. A leader must recognize that while she may be an expert in some areas, she needs help in other realms and must become a learner. She needs to understand that time-tested strategies work in some situations, but in the fast-changing world, you need new solutions. Exemplary leaders know when to talk and when to shut up and listen. They are aware of when to exercise authority and when to share it. Savvy leaders understand when and how to use intuition and analytics in decision making. They comprehend the balance between having perfection versus having a good enough approach. The universe comprises opposing forces, and leadership is similar. Opposing forces create tensions, and exceptional leaders understand every action has its pros and cons. They have learned to balance them. Balance is also the key to everyday behavior of leaders. On the one hand, you want to give your team confidence in your leadership, but how can you express confidence without coming across as arrogant? How can you be authentic while adapting the lessons of other leaders? As a leader, how do you set a pace for execution while comprehending the individuality of your team members? When you show you care about those you lead, how do you do it without letting them take advantage of it? Back to you, Janaki.
Thank you, Shanta. That was fascinating, right? Fascinating set of trade-offs and tensions that you talk about. And then you go on to draw upon the description of Jacinda Ardern as, how she leads as being one among them, when always, perhaps so far, the traditional thought as leader is a person apart, right? Just curious, when you hear about these leadership dilemmas and tensions, rather, what comes to your mind? What are some dilemmas that are maybe topmost on your mind, and what strikes you?
When I read that, first of all, I love the Beatles. And so Shanta's book was so much, I share it with lots of people. I share it with a lot of talks. The one thing that comes to my mind is going back several years, since KG already dated me, we're celebrating our 50th year from Gindi this year, Shanta and I, our class. When I first joined into HP Labs, David Packard was still going around, and when I became a general manager there, at his last general managers meeting, and he was truly a mentor and believed in a lot of the things that the then Hewlett Packard believed in. He was asked the question, what is the highest point of your life? And I was very fortunate to be sitting next to him at lunch. And many of you will relate to this. He said to me, what are you eating? What are you eating? And I jokingly said to him, because I knew that this was a thing that went between us. And when we set up HP India, I said, I'm eating Tair Sadam. And he was like, oh yeah, that's what makes you the South Indians really, really smart, doesn't it? Reason I'm bringing this up is that he answered the question, what was the highest point in your life with, he sat up and he said something that Tom Peters quotes later. Excellence is not a hill to climb that's already climbed. What, do I look real old to you? Excellence is in the next 5 minutes. And he went on at that. It was very hard to understand him. He was hard of hearing. He had a slur. He died within the next few months. He went on to talk to us about excellence and the balance in leadership. I don't know if you knew this, Shanta, but this was his last talk to Hewlett Packard general managers, and about balancing the balancing of opposites. He didn't quite use those words, but that's kind of really came to my mind. When I look at that, just fast forward many, many years into iMerit today, which is one of the things Janki asked me to talk about. For us, this balance is exceedingly important because we talk about 2 feet planted firmly on the ground, not balancing 1 foot or hopping on the other foot, 2 feet. Why? Because we are very much a hugely technology company in AI and everything you think of, autonomous vehicles, not that we should talk about that now with the last 2 weeks, but medical AI, etc. And we have a double bottom line. What does that mean? And what is this 2 feet planted firmly on the ground? 1 foot is and we actually use this phrase, maniacal focus on clients, solving client problems, and client health. And you hear that throughout the 6,000 people in the company. The other foot, equally balanced, is being able to do that with an inclusive workforce. As KG said, we have over 6,000 people. The average age of the company is 24.1. And there are very sassy people in my company who would say to me, if it were not for you, it would be 23. So that's the kind of company it is, very much born mobile, born digital. And it's a composition of the employee base. It's all employees, is 53% women, 70+% young people from low income, different kinds of marginalized backgrounds who have really been skilled into some of the foremost technologies. And this balance is not something we decide in the articles of association and put it out there. Yes, we are a PRI company. Yes, we have a B Corp and all that, but that is just the paperwork. This balance comes in every decision. The excellence of this is in the next 5 minutes and being able to look at issues and being able to balance through them. And it's all the question of that what is at the core of the business, what runs through the fabric and fiber and the DNA of the business. And we can't be spouting this just at the leadership level. It has to be within every person in the company. And that shared vision, that shared practice of 2 feet planted firmly on the ground. And it applies to every aspect of the company. So I wanted to start with that and share that as a practice for us. And I can answer questions about this, Janki, later, but I want to hand it back to you to ask the questions about it either now or later. What are some of those issues, major issues we come across, and how do we address them? You can always state, I mean, we're just going through, and I'm going to be politically incorrect. You know me, Janki, I'll put my foot into it. We're just going through, the Supreme Court's talking about affirmative action. Is this about affirmative action? That we have 53% women? No way in heck. Because remember, that foot planted firmly on the ground is about the excellence with clients and a maniacal focus on clients. Is the fact that we pick a client because we have this inclusive workforce? No, we're highly competitive. And we better be among the leaders, global leaders of AI technology services. So how do you balance these things? Anyway, I'll stop with that. And you can ask whatever you want.
No, fascinating, fascinating. And we will go into a bunch, but how do you balance it? Is there one thing that you want to perhaps say that you as the leader, CEO of the company leans into?
So I think one is really building that on a day-to-day basis as something shared at every level, whether it's team leads. Team leads are at the core of what we do, right? Because they see the team members and every day. At the project management, at the solution architect. So making this part of the way we interview, the way we bring people in, the onboarding of new people, whether it's we just onboarded a chief product and technology officer with lots of experience from Qualcomm. He comes from like 18 years at Qualcomm. That and iMerit are very different. We're bringing him in because he brings all these skills. But as part of our onboarding, we make sure that this happens. And the reason I say this is I think it's my job, is if I concentrate this at the leadership team, then things become hierarchical. They have to flow from the top to bottom. You cannot make culture flow from top to bottom. Culture has to be pervasive. It's almost, it's sort of insidious in a nice way. And it pervades everybody. So everybody looking at it is making that decision. I would say that that's probably what I spend most time on. I visit every center, I literally meet every new person we hire. And when we do our onboarding and we make sure that somebody from the leadership team is there. I try to attend as many of them and making sure that this culture is distributed. I would say that's the most important role I play, I think.
Awesome, awesome. So Shanta, you also touched on that when you talked about managing the tensions among the leadership styles of the different people on your team. And there is a board member who also asked that question about differences in leadership styles. And you allude to in the book and say that the way to manage the tensions is to build a diverse team where you're drawing on the strengths of different people for the diversity. Diversity, I feel like, is like an overloaded object, if I can call it.
It is.
So
It is.
maybe if you can start with, what do you mean by diverse?
By that, I mean in every way you can think of diversity. So it's not about race, religion, and all of those things that people usually bring in. It's not about gender. To me, it's about thoughts. You have your thoughts, I have mine, and you need a place where you can allow everybody to think freely. As Voltaire said, think for yourself and allow the freedom for others to do the same. And when you do that, you get diverse opinions, diverse approaches. And that to me is probably the key. And I would say that all these other diverse backgrounds, you know, your culture, your race, whatever else, they actually shape your thoughts. Think about it. It's how you grew up, for example, what you grew up with, all of those things you bring into the way you approach things. So to me, that diversity, the diversity of thinking is extremely key. And when you have a diverse team, and I would say that this was the case with, for example, my startup that we had 4 co-founders. We all had different strengths and different weaknesses. And our CEO was so good. He said, hey, I am good at this, but Shanta is so good at product development and engineering. Peter, you are very good at finance. And, so he basically let us all flourish in our own way within the team. And I think that's what I mean by having this diverse team. And Radha is absolutely right in the sense that it has to permeate the whole organization at every level.
Got it. It's super helpful. And maybe you can help with an example in terms of, because when we think of their opposing points of view, whereas a decision or an action has to be taken, how do they come together? Maybe you can help with an example as to how do you reconcile these diverse views? Is there perhaps an example you can think about?
Shanta? Yes, Shanta, right?
Yes, Shanta.
Yeah,
I
is
think,
this for me?
yes, please. Just continuing
okay.
on your thought trajectory.
Well, there are so many examples that you can bring about in decision making. I think when we were preparing for this session, we talked about how do you make decisions, remember? And
Yeah.
the decision making is about gathering input from everybody in the team, but ultimately, as a leader of the team, you own the decision making. And for example, you have an architect in your team and you have the engineering lead, and they both give you an opinion about how to craft this product, for example. So you have to listen to both of them. You have to listen to the merits. But at the end of it, if there are differing opinions, you have to kind of hang your hat on something and go with it. It could be a compromise, or it could be just based on what the architect says, but ultimately you have to decide this is what we are going to do and make sure that everybody says, okay, I really believe that agree to disagree is a principle that everybody ought to, adhere to when you're in a team. And then if you are making that decision, you go with what you decided for the product. Often it doesn't even come to me, right? It gets in the team level, whoever owns that product, the product manager does it. So
awesome. Just as a follow-up to that, right? As a follow-up to that, you made a distinction here, but often we hear that leadership tries to thread the and. It's not the either or, but it's an and, if you will, right? And they're trying to do both. So I'm curious, given that there is a tendency to drive for an and all the time, are there different leadership styles? Is there a different, I don't know, rather, how are you described as a leader, if you don't mind being candid?
Direct, candid, tough, occasionally kind. No, I want to say something. I actually we'll talk a little bit more about it because I get a lot of feedback. First and foremost, I do. I have literally have a board, a wall on which, this is this day and time, people can actually post comments. And I had one very interesting one. You would think that young people who are, from low income backgrounds, they are the most, they have no barriers. So I did an all hands ones and I was very, very happy with the all hands and everything. And so I got all these wonderful feedback. And a dozen of them came back and said, oh, this was excellent. It was the best one we had. But you could have performed better. I was like, whoa, okay. Well, what could I have done better? And they were so spot on One of them was the fact that I talk fast, and they said, there are people from different backgrounds. We have a very diverse workforce. And maybe they didn't quite understand the words you were using. And I was like, oh, okay. But having that feedback is really important. I was going to start, since you were on this topic of diversity, because before I talk about what kind of style I have. He's not my favorite person in the world, but there was a question asked recently in the Supreme Court by Justice Clarence Thomas, and whether you like him or not, and I don't, but that's okay. It's not a political conversation. He said, what is diversity? My first reaction to that was, blah, 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 he doesn't know what diversity is. How can he be in the Supreme Court? But then I actually sat down and said, how would I describe diversity? How would I describe it to myself, to our company, to the communities? And I started putting things down. And then I found myself into page number 2, into page number 3. And I'm like, oh, he did ask a good question, much as I hated that he asked that. And I think that this whole idea of diversity, equity, inclusion that we talk about a lot, and that being an important leadership style, I think it is important for companies to be able to look at this and focus on it. And again, Janki and Shanta, I'm sorry for not being politically correct. You know me well enough to know that I get into trouble about these things. But to me, we don't have a separate group heading up diversity, equity, and inclusion. We have, because of some of our investors, we have a board subcommittee on it, which I always say, well, if you have to ask this question every quarter, there's something wrong about the way we're building our company, because 1 foot is very much an inclusive workforce. Inclusive brings in diversity of leadership, not just the entire company, diversity of leadership styles, diversity of inputs, equity in listening to them, the inclusivity. I'll give you 2 examples that have really stood out for me. Again, being a very young employee base, we work quite a bit in autonomous mobility, whether it's ground robots and aerial robots to do with geospatial and drones and stuff, and home robots in being able to do virtual reality, augmented reality. We have clients in each of these. One of our AV clients, and we do a lot on Slack, communications on Slack. So you can't really, so we don't have a lot of monitoring of the Slack, between the client and us. So one of the times I noticed, I personally noticed, I was on the floor, it was midnight or 1 o'clock in the night. I noticed the CTO of one of these large AV clients on Slack asking questions of one of our team leads about what would be her judgment in looking at these policies. It was something to do with distance on an AV between 2 vehicles. And generally, we have this 3-car length thing. And she came back and I thought, good grief, why is he asking her? This is something these guys should know very well. And he came back because she's doing so many annotations. Her team is, we literally have done over 1 billion annotations or 1.5 billion annotations for AV alone. And she came back, boom, and said, your 3-car length is wrong. I was like, oh my gosh, she's telling the CTO this is wrong. And she explained why. And she explained why it needed to be more than that, because AVs take time to think. It's faster, they're slower than human brains, and she had this whole set of things. This was a young lady, who is 23 years old and comes from a background that you would never, probably not been in a lot of cars, etc. But the logic with which she did it. So my point is diversity and the usefulness of diversity is not because you have a number of X% of this, X% from low income, etc. It is the diversity of decision making. And particularly, we are so data driven now that that diversity of thought can be in a variety of different places. And having the equity to bring that in and the inclusiveness makes for, in my opinion, pervasive in the company, makes for a very, for me, a very useful, productive leadership style, because I'm getting inputs from different people, and the value of the company is seen not in the leadership, but in every single person who's working. One last thing I would say about this, and this may not be intuitively obvious, is retention becomes much higher. Our attrition is at 8%, even with the great resignation. Retention with women is at 94%. And this makes for a huge amount of value with the client, because especially in these times when lots of changes are happening, they look to us for that stability and the ability, and it allows people to continuously learn and move up the value chain. So it has great business value, and hopefully, it's not a double bottom line thing. I know all those cliches. I teach social entrepreneurship, but it is the value to the client. Okay.
Super helpful, super helpful. Thank you. I think, the depth to which you went into the example really brings out the color, right? In terms of when we talk about the decision making. One question on this, and hopefully, and then we can move on to the couple of strategies that you talk about, Shanta. One of the questions that I often get is the following. If you end up being the only woman in the leadership circle, is there your ability, is it compromised because now you're considered the diversity candidate, right? And how does that, you as either the woman or the minority or the person who could be perceived as the diversity candidate, how do you sort of trade that off when you think about your ability to be effective? Either one, rather, Ashanta.
Professor, what's your thought? And then I'll go into the practical aspect of things. Yes.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Shanta. Yeah.
No.
Okay.
Go for it. I'm leaving the floor to you.
So you want me to address, just say Janaki again, what exactly do you want me to answer?
The question is the following. In an attempt to bring in diversity of thought, and that thought is a culmination, if I can call it, of your experiences. And part of those experiences are that your experiences as a woman are different than experiences as a man. Your experiences based on religion are different. Your geography is different. Your economic income, economic status is different, etc. But if you say that the thought is the culmination of these different experiences, diverse experiences, but nevertheless, when you are in the leadership circle and people perceive you as the diversity candidate, right? How do you think about that in terms of the ability to be effective? Because in some ways it feels like the ability of the candidate is compromised.
Absolutely. And, I will not take a job. Shanta knows this well. I will not. I've only had 3 jobs in my life, right? Hewlett Packard, support staff, and now iMerit, sort of Anudip to iMerit. I will not take a job. And by the way, I have never really, I know it sounds really strange, but I've never really interviewed for a job. So it's, but I will say this, I will not hire or be hired or even speak somewhere because I am the diversity candidate, right? Because that means they do not value all that's being brought in because of diversity, right? What happens in AI is an example. If you don't have diversity, you have the debacles of developing audio AI solutions, technologies that only cater to the people around you, which were in this particular case, was a lot of white men. So the CEO was a woman, could not, her automated stuff just didn't work. And she tested it and she said, take it off the floor. So diversity comes in, and particularly as we look at the technologies today and look at, you look into medical AI, if you don't bring in the diversity of cases when you're training surgical robots or you're doing stuff with ultrasound images and things, or cataract surgeries, whatever they may be, if you don't bring in the diversity, you do not address it as a global product or technology or services company. So you have to value that. The other thing is that, I mean, this is why I say when people ask me, okay, we're a 50-50 company. Man, this company is right down the middle, 50 plus 1, 2, and makes for, and age as well, and economic backgrounds. It makes for a very difficult, but very, very satisfying to be a leader in this company. You're on your feet all the time. And it's, there's a comment there from Murli. It's really about empowering employees at whatever stage they come from, where they come from, and what their backgrounds are. They bring their backgrounds into the present, right? I'll tell you, during COVID, if I can give an example, oh my gosh, I learned so much during COVID. So we were 100% in the centers. And March 23rd in India and earlier in March in the rest of the world, right? We went to work from home. Can work for a lot of companies because they're balanced. For us, imagine our people who come from villages or from very low income housing, they don't have a home to put their stuff there. People emptied out I kid you not, emptied out their gas cylinder and the stove in order to put their laptop there. This was the kind of stuff. We had to bring broadband into communities that in like 2 weeks that did not have high-speed broadband at all. And last 10 kilometers or 10 miles we had to lay, including in New Orleans, right? Or in communities in Pittsburgh. The agility and the can-do of many of the people and ability to juggle during COVID that brought us back all of our clients within 5 weeks. And we grew 80% during COVID, was a lot because people from diverse backgrounds know to juggle. When they have little, they know how to juggle between things. They have a can-do attitude. They didn't sit and people would say, oh, I'm putting up this dongle and this big stick, it sits on top of my roof. And they did a little diagram of it and pulled it out. And then they looked at what timings the broadband was best and worked during that. There was a whole, we had a war room Google Doc that was set up, not by me, not by my CTO, not by my chief delivery officer who came with it, but by those young people who wanted to make it work. Talk about how this company succeeded and came back online and came back full force was because of the diversity and inclusivity of the workforce. It brought me the most amount of respect to understand, coming back to the comment about empowering employees at all levels.
Thank you. A couple of things. So if we go into, let's say, traditional rubrics, right, that are used to evaluate leadership styles, Russell Reynolds has a bunch, Spencer Stewart has a bunch, etc. They talk a little bit about there is diversity in the style. For instance, you can have a pragmatic leadership style. You can have a disruptive leadership style. You can have a very risk-taking versus a consensus building. You have the notion of, someone, leads by example very heroically versus leads by showing vulnerability. They lead by either connecting or by galvanizing. So there's a whole bunch of, if I can call it, either ends of the bookends when it comes to these leadership traits. I'm curious, and maybe Shanta, you can help us here by thinking about how does a leader figure out what is my leadership style? What are my attributes? What is best suited? And how do I go about this?
Yeah. The leadership style, people think it's just one thing. It's actually, many of us have a predominant leadership style, if you will. It's what comes to us naturally, by the way. But the one that works for a leader is what I would call situational leadership. Daniel Goleman wrote tons about this situational leadership style, mainly because leadership is not about handling one thing. It's about many things. When a leader has to deal with a crisis, the way they behave, the way they show their leadership style is very different from when they are sitting down with some of the team members who are going through tough times, for example. So if you take the Twitter example, Elon can go in there and say, my God, this company is nuts. They are losing so much money. Sure, go ahead. Create some plan to deal with the crisis. Yes, you may have to lay off a number of people, but how do you do that? That's people's side. And that, if you do it with compassion, then you are exhibiting situational leadership. You deal with crisis in a certain way. You deal with the people who are part of this solution in a very different way. And that's, to me, is what differentiates a good leader from a not so good leader. You know, you are inherently, you have a certain quality in you about how you go about. You know, one may say, I am an authentic leader and this is how I do it. Elon can claim that I am this kind of a leader, right? But does that help? No. It is really about how do you deal with each situation. And I really like the style of the New Zealand Prime Minister, who at the time the COVID hit had to talk to her citizens, the New Zealand citizens. And the way she did it, she made herself one of them. And she approached it with compassion. She said, hey, we are all in this together. It's a very different approach than saying, you will go do this, kind of a authoritarian approach. So to me, it's all about situational leadership, and I wish everybody would understand what that means and develop themselves. And that's one of the things I say in my book in this chapter, actually. Yeah.
I want to do a quick time check. KG, how are we doing on time? And then maybe dive into part 2 of this, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, I think people are welcome to stay as long, but if we can break for a Q&A, and then if we can come back as well, that is good.
Let's do it. Let's do that. Let's go for the Q&A and come back. Just going into the Q&A, for those of you who are curious, Shanta talks about 4 strategies, being using intuitive or analytic methods appropriately, asking for help, being humble, and think for yourself. So she talks about some very specific ways. That's one of the reasons why I absolutely love the book, Shanta, is because, you go into the specifics of, how can you do this, as the starting point, if you say, if all of us want to become better leaders. With that,
and it's intrinsic traits versus rising to the occasion. And absolutely. I mean, I was reading through it, and as I was reading through the book, I was actually thinking about, and I was using it with some of my leadership team as well. And it's really interesting to look at it that way. Yeah.
Awesome. Go for it, KG. You can either lob a question at 1 or 2, or just take it, and hopefully, either Shanta or Radha or myself will take the question. Go for it.
Yeah. I just want to give a chance to people who have joined live. If you have a live question you want to directly ask, this is your time. Otherwise, I'm going to go with the questions that I've received in the chat. Any volunteers want to go? Calling 3, 2, 1. I don't want to waste time. Yeah, you can still raise hands or give some indication. We can directly talk.
Post it in the chat, anything. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to go with the first question. how does one handle the situation where there are stark differences between your leadership style and your manager's leadership style?
Yeah, it's a very, very good one. And I'm going through one of these right now. I tend to be very much in it, you know, and my clients call me the RCA queen, root cause analysis. If things don't, my clients call me that. I've done RCA sessions with my clients. So, but I tend to look at a problem and say, what's the RCA on it? You know, this is what happened, and or we think it's going to happen. And this person is exactly the opposite leadership style wise. They say, okay, you do whatever it needs to be done and come back to me. I do not need to be in the RCA, or I don't even need to. I think an RCA can take away from and people might feel bad, etc. And RCAs is not about making people feel bad. And I have an approach as well. I think Janki and Shanta have heard this, maybe some of the others too. And I learned this from a boss who was the toughest one I've ever worked for. He's an ex-Marine. And oh my God, he was nobody at HP wanted to work for him. And I ended up working for him. And I would say that I learned the most from him. But he would look at problems, especially with people, and say, and it looked very rude and uncaring, but in the end, it worked well. Is this a height or a color of hair problem? Height or color of hair? Now I said to him, I said, Mike, that is really rude. That's really uncaring. He would, at least I had the courage to talk to him, right?
Well, one is solvable and the other is not.
Exactly. And I've learned over the years, sometimes I mumbled it to myself because people might get hurt by it. But the height problem means, and he told me, he said, by the way, he wasn't that tall. He was like 5'5", 5'6", and real stocky guy. He was scared. I would not want to meet him in the dark alley. But he said, hey, you want to play basketball? I could tell you, you have a real height problem, lady. And I said, so do you. He says, okay, so we will not be, and whoever it was, we were talking about the UCLA Bruins at that time. And so, yeah, neither of us would be on that team. And he said, you have to understand what's your height problem and being candid about it. And he says, you know, I'm not kind. You can be kind if you want, but being candid about it is good for both the other person and the company, not just for the company, because it destroys the person being told every day, every week, and there are others with the color of hair. And, you know, if you wanted them to go bald and they don't agree, then you don't. If they want to just be colored a little bit and, you know, do it this way, that way, you can give it a try. You can give the feedback. You can argue with them because they have some basic thing. They have the height. They may not have the intent and the desire. This thing has really helped me a lot. And this particular person I'm talking about, it was funny, you know, it was very much a height problem. It wasn't the fact that he didn't want to do an RCA. It wasn't the fact that he couldn't run that particular function really. It's the fact that he really had a height problem. And finally sitting down with him, you know what happened? This happened just in the last 2 weeks. And I felt really bad. He says, you know, I cannot run this function for this technology. It was a technology function. And he goes, no one's told me that before, that I have a height problem. By the way, he's 6'3". And he said, you did. And I appreciate it. And I will be turning in my resignation. I have 3 other people who can do the succession planning. I came out of it. I was feeling bad, but at the same time, I felt like, okay, thank you, Mike. I did it kinder than you have done to many others and to me. But it's worth it. So all I'm saying is that candid response and being able to in leadership styles. And the other times that you have to look at it and say, you know, that guys, the person is really correct. Change yourself. That's tough too. That is tough too. You have to look at yourself and say height or color of hair. And if it's a height, you need to bring in another CEO to be able to do this. So it's
love
tough.
it. Love it, Radha. So for all of us, we'll walk out Monday morning and at least take away one thing, look at the problem and say, is it a height or a color of hair? You've given us a nice lens. Thank you. Go for it, KG, for the next one.
So next one, some companies claim to be customer first and others say employee first. How do you balance between the two? Great tension.
Oh, guys, come on. How can you be? I go back to my nothing else. 2 feet planted firmly on the ground. Maniacal focus on clients and inclusive workforce. And, just do it. Be candid in a kind way and empower the employees to make some of those decisions themselves. They'll get it. They're much smarter in most cases than the CEO, I can tell you, even though as a CEO who comes out and stuff, but they have the ability, if you hire the right people and you empower them, you have the ability to do that. And I would say this for Indu, I think really bringing in these traits and being able to, with students at Gindi, to be able to bring in, we think entrepreneurship is only with young companies. Entrepreneurship is at every level, even of large companies, right? Every level. And bringing in these traits and qualities and examples into entrepreneurship and engineering, I think Indu might be really helpful. I'm telling you how to run a whole university, but I think it would be really helpful.
Awesome. I was going to say it's a very CEO-like answer, rather. They'll figure it out.
I have to figure it out too, right? So
totally.
Yeah,
One more, KG.
if I may add one
Yes, please.
more thing. I think that any company, any leader who treats their employees very well are multiplying the effect. Because the term that I want to use is the multiplier effect. If you show, and I am a big believer in being a role model, and if they see you doing something well, your behavior gets multiplied by all the employees that you are treating well. So to me, employees come first and they will take care of all the customers.
Excellent answer. I would tell you, this retention thing I talked about, I really agree with that. I can't just say they come first at the expense of clients. That's what I was saying. But knowing an employee, when being able to G-chat, that's what we do, right? And I'll get employees saying, I got the most touching thing at G-chat I've ever received is a young lady who sent me a picture from the delivery room of herself and her baby. And she said, Dee, I'm sending this picture to you before I send it to anybody else in my life. And to me, it was like the most touching thing. And I felt that this person will make all the right decisions for herself and the company, and so that feeling, that treating them well, Shanta, is so good for yourself as a leader and for the other person, because that's you're building that, right? So I completely agree with being, even at the worst times, even in the hardest times, even when you're doing big layoffs, when you're sending very difficult messages, doing that with being candid. Don't sugarcoat it. I don't believe in sugarcoating. Be candid, be really sometimes brutally honest, and do it with a little bit of care.
Excellent. KG, one more?
I have one more question. I think we have also touched it, but I would still ask. I hope you would agree leadership styles have changed over the years, almost as if every decade is distinct. Where do you see it evolve in the next few decades? How do you balance between staying relevant versus sticking to something that works already?
Maybe I can do a little bit of a framing and then would love to hear from Radha and Shanta. So perhaps previously the leadership was more, shall we say, suitable for manufacturing oriented companies, very much of a command and control. And now it has shifted to a servant leadership where we are saying that the decisions, the actions, the knowledge are all with the front line, with the people who are handling the situation. And it's not like the CEO knows something, CEO, any of the C-suite knows something that the others don't. So it is a dramatic shift, if you will, right, from the command and control to a servant leadership style. So with that framing, we'd love to hear Shanta.
If I may take this, we all think that leadership has changed over the years. And yes, it has, because we hear a lot more about what works today, because the knowledge workers have multiplied. I mean, every industry, if you see, we have much more workers who are knowledge workers versus not. And this knowledge worker terminology was coined by Drucker. I hope everybody knows Drucker from way back. So there were many leadership gurus, for want of a better term, who actually were advocating many of the things that we actually see today as being how leadership should be. A few people listened to it, few people did not. We have had many leaders who we praised at the time of their height of fame, like Jack Welch, and now he is being, talked about as, oh my God, what kind of leadership was that? So what I want to say is, I think that moving forward, I call what is known as humanistic leadership, meaning you have to focus on getting results. That's what businesses are about. But balance that with the care that you can give to the entire team that works with you. And keep in mind, you can't do everything by yourself. Leader doesn't do it all by themselves. It's the whole team. So share, your responsibilities, share that claims. And that is the kind of leadership that will, I believe, be the future. That everybody, one of the reasons I wrote the book was that I wanted to democratize leadership. By that, I mean, every one of us is a leader and we can make a difference and we have to believe in it. And that, I think, would be the future.
Anything rather on that one? I see there is a request in the chat to touch on the 4 strategies. I know we're over time and they may have conflicts, others, everybody might. But KG, let us know, is there another question you want us to take?
Yeah, I have one more question. So actually, let's do the time check. If we are okay to wait another 5 to 10 minutes, then we can take 2 more questions. And if there is anything to wrap, we can wrap. So is that okay? 10 more minutes or 5 minutes?
Yeah, I think, and you have a wrap as well. I think you were going to hit on the strategies. And
okay, so let's take one last question then.
Okay, then we'll do
how do you unlearn and relearn? It is an admission that we were wrong about something, and that is really hard for us as human beings to do.
I don't know.
yeah,
Things change, no? Why is it we took a wrong thing? But go for it. Yeah.
I think to me, it's to do with being a lifelong learner and listening. Then you don't have to worry about unlearning and relearning. The question is about the changing styles. I think today you have to adapt yourself to many different changes. For one thing, the proliferation of information, the proliferation of data, that fact that people are becoming more and more, young people are becoming self-learners, and there is a lot to learn from. And so I think, and this kind of goes into the strategy question as well, because this is something you raised, Shanta, in looking at Within You, Without You. The importance about learning humility. And I don't want to come across, I'm not this my heart forward, really humble person. Everybody tell me all the things I need to learn, I'll learn from it. But to me, it's really important to be self-aware and to know what things you don't know. There's so much that I don't know. And it's coming from different people. And being a continuous learner and listening, I think that's one of the things that has really changed as a leader. We're very data-driven, and we're very much, things are moving so fast, and everything is available for us to learn. And if you look at the technology world, the data-driven, I mean, the digital technologies and the digital transformation that's going on in companies, it's a major change. And so you have to very, I mean, almost on the time being able to change with that in your styles. I will end by saying that on this particular topic, that's so exciting. Otherwise, life would be so boring as a CEO, I have to tell you. It's really exciting to be able to learn new things, being engaged with your people on the ground. What are you doing? How are you doing it? It also gives you the ability that when you go into and talk to our 6,000 people at different levels and say, hey, what are you doing? That people actually feel like they're teaching you something, not that you're coming to review them. You'd be amazed at how much information you gather from it. So that's my view.
Awesome. With that, maybe I can touch on one of the strategies. The first one that Shanta talks about is using intuition versus analytic methods appropriately. The data and the data that you refer to very much, Shanta, falls in the, there is gettable data, there is analytic methods that you use it. Do you find yourself turning to intuition?
I have used intuition all my life. And actually, I would say that maybe not in the early part of my life, but after I have gained experience, I really believe that you have to use data and analytics if you have them. But there are times when you don't have the luxury of having the data and you don't have the luxury of the time. You may have to make a snap decision. What do you do then? And at those times, I think intuition will serve you well. And so I think everyone, when they talk about intuition, I mean, this, Kahneman and others have talked about intuition a lot. And our CMU prof had talked about intuition as well. To me, it's intuition is really coming from your ability to reach into your memory bank and somehow see the pattern of how things had worked before and how it is now, and try and make sense of it. So I think it's not just that you just pluck something out of thin air. It's really coming from all the experiences that you have had, all the previous decisions that you have made. And so to me, when you have data, when you have the luxury of analytics, use them. But when you don't have them, you have to go with your gut instincts.
Awesome. And the reference to the CMU prof that Shanta made in the book is from the Nobel laureate Herb Simon. And he makes a comment regarding Tamilian women cooking. That's
Yes.
a teaser, guys, go get the book and read it. It's fascinating to see the description there. We've, I think, touched on a couple of other strategies. Humility, you spoke about that quite a bit, Radha. One of the last things, maybe as we come up on this 10-minute mark, is to talk about think for yourself. And how do we talk about think for yourself versus a consensus builder? We want as a leader to appear as not, my way or the highway. We want to appear as consensus building. So how do you weave and think for yourself into that? And with that, maybe we should conclude.
So it kind of goes to this, the decision making in critical times, the intuitive, the bringing in the ideas. Probably, and I'm guessing at this a little bit, maybe 30% of the time, at least, I find that, as leader, you have to just, I use the term, like suck it up and make the decision. You don't have enough data. People are giving you all different thoughts. And you have to go on your intuition, go on your kind of gut feel. I think that's a way of saying intuition, Shanta. And you just have, and most important, You make the decision, and you have to know that you have to live with it. It's your decision. You have to be able to say, I was doggone wrong on this. This is the earlier question. And you have to turn, company, team, whatever it is, you know what? That wasn't the right decision. And when you make yourself little, I don't know if the word is vulnerable, but at least you are honest in that. People understand why it was a wrong decision, what basis you made it, and it helps the next time. And I think that's part of risk taking. You take the risk, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And you kind of have to suck it up, and you cause some major changes in your company, and you have to be responsible. So you have to be very responsible about it, but you just have to do it. I don't know what else to say. There is no magic formula here. You just have to do it. Go with your gut. And there are many cases, that's 70%, where you better listen to other people. And that balance, coming back to our original leadership dilemmas and balance, I think that happens pretty much on a day-to-day basis. And you learn to trust yourself and learn to trust your instincts and learn to also say when you're wrong.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Indeed. KG, you have the last word.
Oh, I have a special request. There is one live person ready to ask question. I don't want to turn down. Can you be very quick, Raji? Can you go ahead with your question? Let's quickly go.
Sure. Yeah. Shanta and Radha and Janaki are all people we look up to. My question is on scaling the fears. Like, transition from an employee to an employer, right? You've all done that. And, there are fears of an employee saying that, oh, will I lose my job? Okay. And there are fears of the employer saying that, do I have enough to feed all these mouths, right? And there are desires of an employee saying will I get promoted? Will I go to that level in the company? There are desires of an organization that is much bigger of how do we scale, right? So how do you scale these fears and desires, and how do you make that transition, scale that transition from an employee to an employer?
I think this question, if I might take it, is so germane today because the markets are in turmoil. Half the time, I don't know whether they're going up or down. I don't mean stock markets. I'm talking about the business side, right? People are laying off, but something is growing. I think this is right sizing, actually, what is going on. And people are looking at it and saying, it could be a longer winter. How do I right size to be able to conserve cash? I know as a young company, as a smallish company, that's very much in our minds, being able to grow our clients while we conserve a lot of things, right? And so in those cases, as an employer, and I put myself on both sides, an employee, you're saying, I should have gotten a bigger bonus. So, I care about myself and my family, but why didn't I get what I got last year? As an employer looking at it and saying, I need to be able to retain all these good people. And I know some winters are coming. I need to make sure that my cash is neutral at best, and not necessarily, and shouldn't go into negative, so I can conserve it. The end cash is king during these times. And I think that part of it is sharing in teams, not with an all hands, but sharing with teams. That some teams we have to invest in more in others because some things are more needed right now. But basically a lot of communications, Raji. It is hard. It is hard when you have a large number of people doing it 50 at a time. I mean, you can imagine, right? It's like 120 town hall kinds of or communication chats. But if you don't do that, some people think, why did they pick that? Why did she pick this over that? And they're not part of the solution. I think that then the employee starts to feel more like little bit like the employer, if you know what I mean. And but it's not easy. I hate to come across on any of this stuff as, oh, here's the answer. It's not easy, especially in times like this. But we have to make them feel as much, understand the decision making, even if they are not part of it. So they understand where you're going. And that's the best answer I have. There's no magic to it.
Mhm.
Yeah. Thank you for putting your authentic self out there, Radha. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
KG, if there's nothing else, it's a wrap.
Yep. So for the last part, I have a Beatles song again to close. Before that, I want to also thank everyone for joining today, and special thanks to all the speakers. This is really nice, and I felt like there's so much. So we will definitely go on with the series. So please keep supporting us. With that, I'm gonna play Beatles song.
Yeah, can we get feedback from the people on this? Only works by making it better, to make it better by getting all your feedback, and be authentic and be brutal about it. That's the only way we learn. So think of my employees who've told me how badly I do all hands. So
Yeah. Is there any closing words, or can I go with playing?
Janki, any closing words?
Let's do it. Let's do it. Let's hear it. Hello and goodbye was the beginning, and so let's go to the next one now.
All you need is love.
All you
Indeed.
need is love. I love the Beatles. Come on, Shanta, start singing.
KG is going to play.
Oh, all you need is love.
Yeah. Love, love,
Love is all you need. Janaki.
Save us, KG.
Oh, you're not sharing?
No, it's not.
Oh, okay. So I'm not
Janaki
listening to
says, save us.
Do you hear now?
Otherwise, these two will take off.
No, we didn't hear it.
We didn't hear it. Come on, KG. You're making it.
KG was too busy typing, thanking everyone. So
Yeah.
No, I'm playing in the background. Do you
Oh,
not
there
hear?
you go.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna play one more time. Sorry, I was
Yeah.
hearing 3 times already. You sure did?
Love, love.
Very nice. Thank you all for a very enjoyable
Thanks
Sunday
all.
night.
Thank you all
Thank you.
very much. Really appreciate it.
thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you.
And
Bye.
thanks for all staying by. Please send us your comments. Bye-bye.